Hi, Kimberly. Nice for you to join me. I was doing a sort of history of status employment, and it suddenly realized it was nearly 31, 32 years ago when I first met you. And I thought it would be really good to give some history about how status employment actually started and you maybe introduce yourself and your role in status.
Okay, so my name's Kimberly Charman, and along with Tony Coggins, we founded Status in what year was it, Robert? I'm losing
I
track.
think 1992 is when it got
Yeah,
incorporated. So
yeah.
my memory is a bit fuzzy, but it must have been in the early 90s we first met, I think.
Yeah, I think we might have started fundraising in about 89, 90, something like that. But yeah, so we started Status, but I need to roll back before then to when I first met you, Robert, which was Tony and I were working together in a day centre for adults with learning disabilities. And basically, we were working with a group of people, and people would come to the day centre when they left school and they stay there till they die. And that was the kind of, it was really occupying people during the day. And a few of the people we were working with kept saying, I want a job, I want a job. And I mentioned this to one of the managers at the centre and said, is this something we can do? And he said, no, no, these people are unemployable. And I remember being really shocked at that and just thinking that can't be right. And around the same time, I picked up a magazine. I think it was Community Care magazine at the time. And there was an article about this organization called Blake's Wharf Employment. And it was doing exactly what we wanted to do, which was supporting people with learning disabilities into employment. And so I contacted them and said, can we come along and meet you? Because I thought at least, even though the manager said it's not possible, let's go and we'll do our own research and see what we can do. And so we contacted them. We went along to this place, Blake's Wharf in Fulham, and we met you, Robert, for the first time. And I can remember that meeting really vividly because I can remember you going through the various people that you were supporting. And there was one young man who was like, you just said really was quite, had severe learning disabilities and it was holding down a job with support, but was managing to do that because you'd found a job that matched his interest. And then trained him in the skills, and I just remember being so fascinated, and it really inspired Tony and I to sort of just think, right, we've got to do something here. And from there we tried going down the route of getting the council, the local authority, to fund it.
I
Yes.
I do remember being invited to one of your away days to
Yeah,
explain about Blake's
yeah,
Wolf, where I think no one, he was always that one of, yes, but then you're working with people, but they're not the same type of people
yeah.
that we are working with. So your people with learning disabilities are different to our people. And I could see the frustration on yours and Tony's faces after that day. And I think you called it action employment.
We did. We actually got them to agree to fund something, and it was called Action Employment. And so they went down that route, set it up, but it was so constrained. They had such a tight rein on it that we couldn't operate it the way we wanted to do it. And so in the end, I think neither of us, we might have even tried running it for a little while, but in the end we said, look, we either do it properly or we don't do it at all. So they actually found somebody else to do that and started that. And it didn't last that long, actually, that service that they were running. Um, and in the meantime, then we decided that, well, look, if the local authority are not going to be interested in this, then we have to go down the route of setting it up as a charity and raising all our own funds. And so that's what we started to do. And it took about 10 months of writing grant applications to all
Yeah,
sorts
it
of.
would have done.
We're complete novices at this at the time. I mean, we were writing this in the evening in addition to working full time. Um, but that first application, we got £5,000 grant from, I think it was at the time, it was Waits Foundation from memory. And that was just, I can remember every time a grant like letter came through the post box, sort of holding it and thinking, is today going to be the day when we get a grant? And it was eventually we got one, and you thought, oh, thank goodness we've got something. But of course, 5,000 isn't enough to give up your job and start. But then we got another grant, and so we actually had about £15,000 to start. And so I decided that I would give up my job with the day centre, but Tony would carry on working there for the time being. So I started then, sort of trying to get Status off the ground. And I did that for probably about another 6 or 8 months before we had enough money then for both of us to start working with it. And initially it was just the two of us. And we started the service. We were based in the Wadden Youth Centre in a little
I remember it. I remember coming to visit you.
Covered, basically. Yeah, that's right. And we started from there, and we had, an old computer someone had donated to us, and we had some trustees, and we had a really good group of trustees actually, who were very, I'd say, challenging in a good way, in that they challenged us to really think about what we were doing and why we were doing it and how we could best do it. And they'd come from several had come from sort of running their own businesses, so that was good for us to think in a different way, and that's how we got it off the ground.
I mean, what is quite amazing is I've still got the picture. We've still got the picture of yourself and Tony at the beginning in the hallway of where we are now. We've moved into the Shirley area. We're now in Westway Gardens.
Yeah.
And I remember before you had 2 or 3 homes, because you moved to Airport House for a while, and then you ended up at the Croydon Advertiser, where
Yes,
the editor David Jones housed you for a while.
Yes, we actually went. So we went from Wadden Youth Centre to this, the tiniest room you could imagine. Then when there were about 4 of us trying to work in this tiny room at various points. And then David Jones at the Croydon Advertiser, who was the managing director there at the time, I'd met him at an event and talked to him, and he was really taken with it. And he said, look, we've got some spare space in our office, and we'd also placed somebody there in a job. So he kind of knew what we did. And so he offered us the space, and we were in that for probably about a year before we had enough money to actually go and rent an office, which was at Airport House. And I think that was the last office that I was in before we handed it over.
Yeah, and I think after that, it was moved to Westway Gardens, where we've remained now for 24, 25 years.
Amazing.
And I mean, one of the reasons we've remained there is it's been accessible. It's not on the high street, which we would have always wanted to be, but rents in London are still so prohibitive, and we still have lots of the same issues that you had then. I can't ever see it changing in that sense of, we're an organization that wants to work with people who might not always be seen as people who should be employed, and therefore don't attract mainstream funding so easy. And I'm like you, it's still a challenge, but a challenge we feel that is incredibly important. And what we've failed to do recently is we ought to try and do and work out how many actual jobs that we have actually got for people. I know we've changed lives, and I know from some of the testimonies of people who were placed back in the day with Tony and yourself, of some of those testimonies that you made a huge difference, and you've changed Croydon's landscape for people with learning disabilities for good.
That's really good to hear. It's, in fact, just last week actually I met up with Terry Smith, who
yes,
placed in the Met Police at the time, and we met him. He was in college. He was in a special needs course at college, had been through special needs education, and he wanted a job. And he said, he was telling me last week, he remembers us going to do a talk at college and just thinking at the end, I think at the end we said, if anybody's interested in finding out more about having a job, come and see us. And he was the first one in the queue to see us.
I think the last time I met him, he was working in home base. No, Wicks. No, Wicks in.
Well, and he also had a job in the court service as well.
Yeah.
So I met up with him last week, and it was just so nice because he was saying how it was that first job that really gave him that self-belief, because until then he'd been told, you know, you're not going to be able to get a job and you won't be able to do this and you won't be able to do that. And he said it was that job that made him, you know, somebody believed in him enough to find him a job and support him in a job. And he said, I still see all the people I used to work with, I still meet up with them regularly. And he also does lots in the community. So he's actually a chairman of a social club for people with learning disabilities now. And you know, he said, without that confidence in that first confidence, I wouldn't be where I am today. And he's in the rock choir and all sorts of different things. And it was just, oh, it's so lovely
I
to see.
really think that this is what people forget. I mean, you know, when I first came into it, I had very little knowledge about people with disabilities and learning disabilities. What I was passionate about was that I believed that people had the right to work. And you can tell by my accent, I'm the grizzled northerner who'd come down, a Norman Tebbit bike person. And I'd seen what unemployment had done to an area. And I'd seen how that had affected people. So when I first came in, and that was in Hammersmith, into Blake's Wharf Employment Services, it felt to me the right thing. And why, like you, why can't this happen and why shouldn't it happen? I think what I hadn't worked on was the enormity of placing people into work, of actually getting them into work, of how it made a huge difference and could make a lifetime difference to them. And I think that's one of the greatest things now as a service is 30 odd years, and we will get a call from someone saying, I don't expect you'll know me, but Kimberly or Tony or someone else placed me back in 1997, and do you think you could help me? And I think that's one of the greatest things for me about Status. We have been able to keep going, and we have been able to keep that legacy going. So it wasn't a flash in the pan. So I think that's one of the really important things for me, is that it does change people's lives
Yeah,
really for the better.
it does. It does. And I think it's the self-esteem. I mean, in the role that I do now, which I'm not in supported employment anymore, but in the role, the thing I hear over and over again from children and young people with disabilities is the lack of self-esteem that they have and the lack of
Yeah.
self-belief that they have. And that isn't, you know, by getting a job and supporting somebody, you know, no matter how many hours that job is for or how sort of entry level that job might be, it gives someone that sort of purpose, that they've got a reason to get up in the morning. They've actually got people that respect them for the job that they do and the contribution that they're making, instead of just receiving all the time. And it just gives them that massive boost of self-esteem, which then has that ripple effect out into the rest of their lives. And also, the other thing is the impact on the community and the impact on the people they work with, because that was a revelation to me, is how people around somebody, their views change. So it's a huge PR exercise as well.
You don't hear it so much today, but when I first started, you'd hear the phrase, does he take sugar?
Yeah.
You know, the one where you would place someone into a job and you go in as the employment consultant and they would talk through you. So they would say, oh, we're making a cup of tea. Does he take sugar? And you could see over a period of time of not telling a person off, but actually educating them by doing the bit. I don't know whether he takes sugar. Tom, do you take sugar with your tea? And suddenly being able to change their concepts, I think was remarkably important, because we talk about, you know, the medical model of disability. And we're obviously in that social model of disability, wanting to change people's ideas and change society. There's no better way than having a person being able to do a job properly, being able to grow into that job, being a person that can communicate and then talk to a person, and then everyone else realizes they're not different. They are just the same. They you know, they want Arsenal to win or they want Arsenal to lose on a Saturday. They had the same sort of thoughts and the same feelings as everyone else. And I think that makes a huge difference to society. It's a way of actually making society, and has made our society, I think, a better society for it. And I think generally it still is, although I do believe we still have massive, massive challenges.
I think the other thing is that in my experience was you have this sort of almost a balance of, of eccentricity and competency. And so when people work with somebody, when they see the competencies that somebody actually has and the contribution they can make, the eccentricities that somebody has, which before may have made them really stand out as peculiar, or made people think, oh, I don't know what that's all about. As the competency rises, the eccentricities
Yeah.
become less obvious, or become more accepted, or more ignored.
And they start realizing that other people in that workplace often have eccentricities as well. And that's the thing about workplaces. There's always eccentricities around, so it doesn't stand out so much. And I think the whole system of supported employment, of having an employment consultant go in and actually train the person to do the job properly. It's a system that works. It's a no-brainer for me that it's always worked, and it's something that Status will always be looking to be making sure that we support the person in the job. And by doing that, you're always increasing the job retention. And I think it's something that you always prided, and it's something that still carries on today.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, I mean, looking at Status now, one of the areas that you might be surprised. We just opened two new services, or just opening two new services. One in Lambeth, and that's helping a BSL cafe, British Sign Language cafe, and we're doing the supported employment support for them. So that's a brand new service that we're just starting, and just started just over a month ago in Lambeth. And we're going back into supported internships. We've just won some funding from the Walcott Foundation, which we're hoping to be able to match a bit to help young people with learning disabilities actually into supported internships and into jobs. So we've just started two new services there as well. So we carry on. We've had that sort of tradition really from Tony and yourself in being able to carry on that tradition of innovation.
Yes.
We've always had to be innovative for lots of reasons, to keep going and to keep that support, but we still carry on doing that, and I think that puts us in the forefront of things that we have done in supported employment.
Yes, definitely. I mean, I'm so happy to hear. I can't believe well, I can believe it, but it's amazing that it's still going today, and that it makes me so proud of everything that it started off as, but also the fact that I love the fact that it's come full circle, and that we met you first. You were the inspiration. We set up. Now you're back there running it, and it's amazing.
It seemed sort of serendipity. I mean, I know what you mean. Is that because when I left Blake's Wharf, Blake's Wharf was a tremendously pivotal organisation that I think helped set up supported employment in Britain. I really think it sort of was a catalyst that sort of went on. It created training, systematic instruction. There were so many things that came from there, and it was great for me. It was a sadness at Hammersmith and Fulham Council when I'd left and people had moved on, decided that they didn't want to fund supported employment, and that was a big sadness for me. And I do think it's very hard when you leave a place, because you can only put the legacy in and hope that moves forward. But like you've had good trustees, I've had a number of good trustees, and I think the thing I'm always looking for in trustees is looking to make sure they have the same values. And that values is about wanting their person, people with disabilities to get jobs. And I think that's so important, is to hold on to that. I think if you've got that, then people like myself and other people keep fighting for it. And I think that's where we are at the minute with Status. But Status certainly owes you and a debt of gratitude, because I think we're still one of the few charities, independent charities, that do fully fledged supported employment within Britain. There's not many. There's one or two. There's a couple of CICs, but mainly it's still council run, or it's still sort of organisations that have got huge amounts of money And I think you're still very, very unique, which I'm proud of.
Yes.
And I think that's a legacy for you and Tony when you
Yeah.
set it up all those years ago.
Mm. Yes, it was definitely the right thing. You realise that at the times things are really tough. It was hard. We wanted it to be run by the council at the time, but you realise that actually it was a blessing that they didn't take it on, because it meant we then had the freedom to run it as we wanted to, and like for yourselves, to go in all sorts of different directions depending on, what the opportunities were.
Yeah, it might surprise you to know we're now involved in everything from virtual reality for people with learning disability. We're now creating our own scenarios. We've helped organisation as far as Lithuania, Romania, Portugal, to help them set up their own supported employment agencies, and they're doing a tremendous jobs. And so I mean, some of that status has moved not just into status but right across. And
Yeah.
in one of my roles is obviously I became very interested in the British Association of Supported Employment. You might have remembered them as the Association for Supported Employment, which I became their treasurer, I think 15, 20 years, about 50, between 15 and 20 years. Very soon after I joined Status, I was asked to join. And from there, I've represented the British Association in Europe for just under 18 years now. So I think that's a legacy that perhaps you wouldn't realise, is how much we've moved supported employment and
Yeah.
helping people with disabilities to be able to get open paid jobs, not just in Croydon, but right across Britain, right across Europe and the world as well.
That's incredible. It's really good to hear.
Yeah.
Yes.
So last year I went to Chile to in a conversation with an organisation around self-employment. We now have our own self-employment project within Croydon, so we've had that running successfully for the past 5 years, where we have had a number of people with a disability who wanted to start their own businesses, and we've had a number of businesses launched in the
Yeah,
Croydon and Lambeth area, which has been brilliant.
that's really good. What type of businesses?
Everything from people who've been developing autistic toys for children, to flower sellers, to dog walkers, to people doing their own wedding planning. It's you can imagine if you give people with disabilities that option about wanting to start their own businesses, people come with not only their interest but their knowledge,
Yes.
and they're putting that knowledge in. And we've got a wonderful entrepreneur facilitator who is there, who's helping them. So we've run it on a supported employment system where the people come. We have a traditional how you start your own business, but then we offer the support, and that
Mm.
carries on
Yes.
whilst ever they're starting. So we've had people set up their own CICs. With that's community interest companies. So we've had a number of different projects going on, different entrepreneurs, and that's something I'm very, very proud of,
Yes.
because again it's getting people to raise their aspirations and getting again people to believe that they can do this.
Yeah. I think the other thing is, and the thing that struck me with supported employment when we first met, was the vocational profiling as well.
Yeah.
That aspect of, really talking to people in depth to really find out what makes them tick. What is it that really makes their heart sing or fills them with joy? What are the things that really capture their interest? And then matching that to a job. So it might not be the thing you obviously think of, but it's, I remember one person we had who wanted to be a bus driver. Well, with the disabilities that he had at the time, that wasn't going to be an actual reality for him. But he eventually got a job working for the big bus company in London. And he'd get the buses ready before they went out. And although it wasn't a bus driver role, it was still within. It gave him that buzz because it was with bus drivers and in that industry. And I think that's what's so powerful.
Yeah.
Because in ordinary society, you find so many people who are doing jobs that they really hate, that don't interest them anymore. And it's such a good thing to be able to find something that captures
And,
their
and
interest.
I think that's a major difference between supported employment agencies that want to believe in the person. You often find when someone says, "Oh, I want to be a bus driver," or "I want to be an airline pilot," the immediate reaction is, "You'll never be able to do that." Shut the conversation up, and that's it. You can't do that. Don't be so silly. Whereas a supported employment agency is thinking, "Thank goodness they've come with something, and I can work on that." So then you can say, "Oh, that's great. What is it about bus driving that you like?" And then you can start opening that conversation up. And that's where a good employment consultant starts looking at it and thinks, "That's wonderful. I can start opening this conversation." And I've lost account of jobs I've got for people in related areas, in different sides of industry and different ways where they've talked about their real interest, but then you've been able to transfer that, and you've been able to channel it and get that interest going, and they've been great job matches.
Yes.
And I
Yeah.
think that is a major difference. It's belief.
Yeah.
We do believe in raising aspiration, but we also are practical in able to how you do that, and we don't close people down. We try and encourage people to talk about that, and I think that's still, for me, that's one of my burning passions, is, in the remaining few years for me, is to make sure supported employment doesn't die, that supported employment is something, with all the new technology, with all the AI, that we don't say there's no need for a person with a disability to work,
Yeah.
that we rise to those challenges, and we help people still engage and do things that they want to be doing.
Yeah. Definitely. Yeah, it's very powerful.
Well, thank you, Kimberly, and thank you for joining. And I'm so chuffed that you came, because as I say, 31 years that it's been incorporated as a company, but it must be closer to 35 years now that you've actually started the journey and in supported employment. And I'm pleased to say that it's still going, and hopefully we can keep status going for another 30 years, which
Yeah.
will be brilliant.
It's brilliant. It's really good. Must have a celebration or reunion or something.
I think that's what we'll have to do. We'll have to do something. We're not very good on celebrations, so we must do something. And maybe it might be getting closer to the 35 years. So maybe we look at that, if we can do that, and actually have a big celebration around all the things that we've achieved. I think that will be something that will be really, really useful.
Yeah, definitely. Good. Well, great to talk to you. And I'm so pleased to hear all that's happening, and to hear, from sort of tiny seeds, tiny acorns, what, oaks have grown from it. It's just incredible. Well
Yeah,
done.
it's surprising what can be achieved.
Yeah.
And thank you.
Good. Thank you.